It happened on a Saturday morning stitched with too many tasks and too little sleep. My daughter Eliana had been rehearsing for months, twirls perfected, every step etched into her bones like second nature. And this was it, the state finals. Her first solo. We arrived at the community center early, the kind of early where the floors still gleam from being waxed the night before and volunteers sip coffee too hot for their nerves. My hands shook a little as I helped Eliana unpack. The room was a flurry of sequins and hairspray, mothers in war paint with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. My sister-in-law, Renee, hovered nearby, as she always did, watching, but never outright helping. Her daughters, the twins Amber and Jade, were already dressed, faces glazed with glitter and practiced smiles. Renee caught my eye and walked over, too casually. "This one, right?" she asked, holding up Eliana's practice dress, the pale lavender one she wore during warm-ups. Before I could answer, I watched in stunned silence as her hands gripped the fabric and tore it straight down the bodice with a force that seemed mechanical, rehearsed. A rip, sharp and cruel, echoed through the room louder than the music blaring through someone's Bluetooth speaker. "Oh no," she said with a smirk that didn't pretend to be regret. "What a shame. Well, I guess the twins have a better shot now." I opened my mouth, but the words caught somewhere behind my teeth. Not because I lacked anger, but because I knew if I spoke, I might not stop. It was Eliana, my 10-year-old daughter with the soul of someone far older, who broke the silence. She tugged gently on my sleeve, eyes calm like still water. "Mom, calm down," she said, and unzipped a separate compartment of her dance bag. Out came her real costume, the one I'd spent 3 weekends crafting. Midnight blue with silver embroidery, soft chiffon skirt cascading like a waterfall. The one I'd kept wrapped in tissue, away from curious fingers. I stared, stunned, then burst out laughing. The kind of laugh that breaks tension like thunder splits the sky. "You thought that was her costume?" I said, meeting Renee's eyes now with all the steadiness she lacked. "That was just for practice." Renee blinked. "Just once." Then twice. She looked around. No one was on her side, not even her own daughters, who glanced nervously toward Eliana. For a brief, glorious moment, the power shifted. And I felt something I hadn't in years, not just victory, but recognition. My daughter's calm, my labor, my foresight, it had all led to this. And that was just the beginning. That morning unraveled truths I had long suspected, but never had the luxury or courage to say aloud. Renee had always played the part of a concerned family member. Polished, poised, passive-aggressive. She smiled when I succeeded, but it never quite touched her eyes. Every compliment she paid came wrapped in quiet poison. "She's so creative, your Eliana," she once told me at a birthday party. "It's adorable how much effort she puts in, even if she doesn't have the natural talent like my girls." I remember how I nodded politely, sipping lukewarm punch, feeling a slow burn rise from my stomach. There were always little jabs like that, hidden in the fabric of family gatherings, stitched between sips of wine and talk of schools and milestones. But this time was different. After Renee's failed sabotage, the air shifted. The other mothers, once hesitant to involve themselves, started whispering. Not behind my back, but to my face. "That was disgusting," one said, shaking her head. "You handled it with such grace." I didn't feel graceful. I felt exhausted. But I smiled. Back in the dressing room, Eliana slipped into her real costume with the kind of quiet focus that reminded me of my own childhood, the careful way she adjusted each strap, the way she stared into the mirror not with vanity, but with intention. She was only 10, but somehow she already knew the power of presence. "Do you want me to redo your bun?" I asked, brushing back a few wisps of hair from her temple. She nodded. "Make it tighter this time." I could see it in her, the shift. She was no longer just dancing. She was declaring something. Renee's daughters peeked in as we finished, silent now, their usual giggles absent. I saw the way they looked at Eliana, not with ridicule this time, but with uncertainty. Maybe even a touch of awe. The announcer called for the next division, solo performers, ages 10 to 12. Eliana's group. She stood and took my hand for just a second, gave it a squeeze. "Thank you for making the dress," she whispered. And then she walked away, her tiny spine straighter than ever. I stayed by the stage curtain, heart pounding in my throat as she took her place under the lights. The music began. And what followed wasn't just a performance, it was an exhale of every long-held breath, every unspoken word. She moved with a confidence I hadn't seen in her before. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply telling her truth in motion. When the final note faded, the auditorium was still for a beat longer than usual. Then came the applause. Not polite clapping, not obligatory parent enthusiasm, but real, thunderous approval. I saw Renee in the crowd, her lips pursed so tightly they had lost their color. And I felt it then, deep and sure, the storm she'd tried to create had watered something resilient in my daughter. Let her smirk. Let them gossip. We had just begun. When the judges announced Eliana's score, it wasn't just good, it was the highest of her division. A perfect 10 in artistry. That number echoed louder in my ears than any cheer ever could. For once, the world outside our home saw her exactly as I did, resilient, radiant, and worthy. The announcer handed her the golden ribbon, and for a moment, time stopped. My daughter stood on that stage with her chin lifted, blinking back the tears she would later tell me she didn't want the other girls to see. She wasn't just proud, she was seen. And that changes a child. That changes a mother. We walked back to the dressing room in silence, not because we had nothing to say, but because some victories are too sacred for words. Inside, the other girls were already packing up. Renee hovered near the door like a shadow looking for somewhere to fall. Her twins sat beside their open bags, unusually quiet, their glitter starting to fade with the day. "Eliana," Renee said, her voice sugar-coated and acidic all at once. "Lovely performance. I'm sure your mom is very proud." Eliana looked up, eyes steady. "She is. And I'm proud of her too. She made my dress." That was my daughter, no trace of cruelty in her tone, just a clean truth. The kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Renee blinked, the edges of her mask cracking, just slightly. Then she turned on her heel and left the room without another word. A small retreat. Not enough to satisfy me, but enough to mark the beginning of something shifting. Later that evening, back home, I sat on the couch while Eliana curled up beside me, trophy in her lap like it was just another toy. We watched an old dance movie together, one she used to love when she was 5. Somewhere between the climactic number and the slow credits, she turned to me and said, "Mom, I didn't get scared at all today. Not even when she tore the dress." "Why do you think that is?" I asked. "Because I knew you were ready. And if you're ready, then I know I will be too." I didn't know what to say. I just pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. That night, after she went to bed, I opened the small notebook I'd kept hidden at the bottom of my dresser drawer. It was where I scribbled things I didn't have the courage to say out loud. Truths too raw for public air. At the top of a fresh page, I wrote, "Today my daughter taught me how to stand taller without raising my voice. How to fight back without throwing a punch. How to win with grace and still look your enemy in the eye." That dress was never just fabric. It was a metaphor, something torn, yes, but not ruined. Something meant to intimidate us, but instead reminded us of what we had quietly built when no one was watching. Let them tear the practice dress. We've got a whole wardrobe of resilience waiting in the wings. In the weeks that followed the competition, the applause quieted, the photos faded from social media timelines, and everyone returned to the gentle rhythm of everyday life. But something had shifted beneath the surface, something subtle, yet unshakable. Eliana began to walk differently. Not arrogantly, not as someone newly crowned, but as someone who had tasted her own strength. At school, her teachers noticed. "She's more focused," one said. "There's a calmness to her now." I smiled. They didn't know what she had danced through. As for me, I returned to work, my desk job at the local community center, where I coordinated events for people who rarely saw their names in lights. Potlucks, small weddings, bingo nights. I used to wonder if this work mattered. But after watching Eliana glow in a space I helped her reach, I began to see it differently. Even small stages can hold greatness. Even quiet efforts shape futures. Then came the invitation. A thick envelope with ivory paper and raised gold lettering. It was from Renee, of course. A formal birthday gala for her husband, held at one of the city's private clubs. Dress code, formal. Tone, exclusive. Intent, unmistakable. I knew what it was, a stage of her own. A way to reclaim control, to reassert her place in the family hierarchy. But I didn't feel threatened. I felt curious. I want to go, Eliana said when she saw the invite on the kitchen table. You sure? It won't be like the competition I warned. She shrugged. You'll be there. And besides, I want to wear the blue dress again. I paused. That dress, the symbol of our quiet defiance, had been carefully hung in her closet, preserved like a memory. She wanted to wear it not just because it was beautiful, but because it meant something now. It meant she could walk into any room and hold her own. So we went. The ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers and too much perfume. Everyone dressed to impress, conversations stitched with subtle jabs and loud performances of status. Renee greeted us with a practiced smile. Oh, you came. That's surprising. We wouldn't miss it, I said, returning the smile with one of my own. Eliana loves a good waltz. We mingled. We made small talk. And all the while, I watched the way people began to notice her, not because she was loud, not because she begged to be seen, but because she carried herself like someone who didn't need permission to belong. And then, a moment of delicious irony, an elderly guest approached us, mistaking Eliana for one of Renee's daughters. What a stunning dress. You look so composed. You must be Amber or Jade. No, Eliana said gently. I'm Eliana. My mom made this dress. And just like that, the velvet rope of pretense split for a moment. Our quiet truth, once hidden, stood in the light. I didn't gloat. I didn't boast. I just let the truth breathe. Because that's the thing about truth, it doesn't need an audience to matter. It just needs space. Later that evening, Eliana sat beside the dance floor with a plate of fruit skewers, her feet swinging just above the marble. Her dress caught the ambient light, shimmered quietly like something enchanted. I watched as Renee's guests drifted toward her one by one, some to compliment, others out of idle curiosity. Amber and Jade sat across the room, unusually quiet, their posture stiff. For once, no one was gathered around them with cameras or doting questions. Eliana hadn't even danced yet. She was just existing, fully, proudly, and that was enough to shift the room. When the live band launched into a gentle waltz, couples made their way to the floor. Renee and her husband swayed stiffly under the chandeliers. I sat alone at our table, nursing a flute of sparkling cider and pretending not to notice the glances from across the room. You look like Cinderella's godmother, said a voice beside me. It was Anthony, Renee's brother-in-law. The kind of man who wore a suit like armor and a smirk like a signature. His comment was meant to charm, but I'd grown tired of polished men who thought flattery was currency. Funny, I replied, not missing a beat. I was thinking more like Cinderella's tailor. She's the one who knew where the real magic came from. He laughed a little too loud, drawing a few glances. Touché. Eliana walked over then, her little hands folded like a diplomat. Mom, can we go soon? I think I've said enough hellos. I nodded. We gathered our things. But as we were leaving, I caught Renee watching us from across the room. Her expression unreadable, almost wistful. Wait, she called out, walking briskly toward us in her designer heels. I wanted to say something. Eliana and I both turned. I Saw the judge's tape, Renee said, clearing her throat. Your daughter earned that win. The score, the way she performed, it was undeniable. I said nothing, just let the silence stretch long enough for the weight of her words to settle. She's very talented, Renee added. And you clearly know what you're doing, Olivia. It was the closest she had ever come to an apology. Not quite an admission, but something. Thank you, I said simply. And as we turned to go, Ileana whispered, that's the first time she's ever called you by your real name. I smiled. On the drive home, Ileana fell asleep in the back seat, her dress pulled like moonlight around her legs. I caught glimpses of her face in the rearview mirror, peaceful and still. And for the first time in years, I felt like a door had opened, not just for her, but for me. Not wide, not with grand ceremony, but it was ajar. Enough to glimpse the world beyond the roles we'd been given. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the end of the silence. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen window in soft gold slants. Ileana sat at the table still in her pajamas, sipping hot chocolate while sketching something in her notebook. I watched her from the stove, the scent of cinnamon pancakes filling the air between us like a promise. What are you drawing? I asked, sliding her plate across the table. A new dress, she replied without looking up. Not for competition. Just for fun. I want to make one with you. There was something sacred in the way she said with not for, not by you. With. I pulled out the sewing box from the hallway closet later that day. It had been untouched since the blue dress was finished, resting like a closed chapter. But now, with fabric strewn across the living room and pins gleaming like tiny stars in their velvet cushion, it became a shared altar again. As we stitched and pinned, she told me about a new girl at school who had been bullied last week, how Ileana had sat beside her at lunch without saying much, just enough. Sometimes you don't need to fix everything, she said. You just need to let people know they're not invisible. I looked at my daughter then, not just a child who danced, but a girl growing into a woman who understood the power of presence. Later, I wrote in my notebook. We're all mending something, dresses, hearts, histories. And sometimes, the smallest gestures hold the strongest thread. That same week, the dance studio called. Miss Lorraine, the head coach, wanted Ileana to join a regional tour team. Scholarships were limited. Competition was fierce. She's got something rare, Lorraine said over the phone. She moves like she's telling a story. Not just steps, narratives. The irony didn't escape me. Renee's sabotage had brought unexpected light, like a crack in the ceiling letting in stars. Because of that one torn practice dress, the judges had taken notice. One moment of petty destruction had made space for a breakthrough. I drove to the studio after hours to talk through logistics. Payments, costumes, travel. As we walked the echoing halls, Lorraine stopped beside a room I'd never seen. We're opening a mentorship program, she said, for young dancers who don't have support at home. Could use someone like you. Someone who listens. Someone who builds, not just critiques. I stared at the empty chairs and felt something stir. An old version of myself that once dreamed of creating, of guiding, of being more than a background figure in someone else's spotlight. And just like that, another door opened. That night, I didn't write in my notebook. I was too busy sketching a different kind of future. The mentorship room smelled faintly of floor polish and possibility. Its windows were wide and undressed, letting the afternoon sun cast bright squares of warmth across the studio floor. I stood in the middle of it that Monday, heart thudding like it used to before every school performance, half excitement, half fear. I had accepted Miss Lorraine's offer, almost without hesitation. Not because I needed another thing to juggle, but because something inside me whispered, "This is yours. Make something of it." The first day was quiet. 3 girls showed up, each carrying something heavier than a dance bag. One of them, Ava, refused to speak at all. Another, Juliana, danced only in corners, like she didn't think she deserved the full space. I didn't teach them moves. Not yet. I taught them how to breathe before a mirror, how to look at their reflection without flinching, how to take up space without apologizing for it. You don't need to sparkle to be seen, I said. You just need to stand. Eliana came to some sessions too, not as a student, but as a presence. She'd bring extra hair ties, share her water bottle, draw funny faces on the mirrors with dry erase markers. She understood in a way I didn't have to explain. Meanwhile, the dressmaking continued at home. We chose fabric together, a soft emerald green satin that shimmered slightly when it moved. Not for performance, just for expression. As we stitched, I taught her the secret language of seams and hems, of staying steady even when the fabric tries to slip from your grip. Some nights she fell asleep with scraps of lace in her hair, her dreams no doubt stitched with rhythm and ribbon. And then came the email. Subject: Parker Family Celebration. RSVP requested. It was from my husband's side, the Parkers, Renee's clan. A formal spring gathering was being organized at a country estate just outside the city. Lawn games, catering, a string quartet, the whole curated affair. Everyone expected to attend. I sat at the kitchen table rereading the message while Eliana sorted beads beside me. Are we going? She asked. I hesitated. It's up to you, Mom, she said, not looking up. But I think if we go, you should wear something you made. There was no malice in her tone, just quiet resolve. I folded the email and placed it under the magnet on the fridge. I would think about it. But I already knew the answer. Later that evening, after Eliana went to bed, I stood before the mirror in my room. I hadn't sewn for myself in years. My hands remembered the motions, but I'd forgotten how it felt to drape fabric over my frame, to imagine something beautiful not just for someone else, but for me. And for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. Not a mother. Not a seamstress. Not a placeholder. Just me. Thread by thread, I was returning to myself. I spent the next week gathering materials, silk in midnight charcoal, a dusky rose lining, pearl buttons reclaimed from a thrift store blouse I'd once loved too much to let go. It wasn't just about the dress. It was about reclaiming something no one could give or take from me, intention. Each evening, once Eliana was asleep, I worked at the dining table. The house fell into its quiet rhythm, refrigerator humming, the occasional creak of old floorboards, the scratch of my pencil as I revised the sketch one last time. I was building more than a dress. I was constructing the version of myself I'd buried under years of pleasing, smoothing, and yielding. The Parker event loomed like a well-manicured storm cloud. Renee sent follow-ups, now laced with just enough faux warmth to raise suspicion. Hope you and Eliana can make it. The girls are dying to see her again. And I heard you're doing mentorship work? That's adorable. I didn't reply. Instead, I focused on the rhythm of the needle, the small defiant acts of cutting fabric with precision, of choosing a neckline not for modesty or approval, but for power. I wasn't preparing to impress them. I was preparing not to shrink. Eliana peeked into the room one night and asked, "What are you going to do when they act like you don't belong again?" I paused mid-stitch, her question curling in the air like incense. "I'll act like I do. Because I do." She smiled and went back to bed. The day of the Parker gathering arrived warm and bright, the kind of spring day that could almost make you forget everything winter had taken. Eliana wore a soft pink dress she'd designed herself, complete with tiny rosettes and an asymmetrical hem she insisted was modern. She looked like a field of blush peonies had decided to follow her around. I slipped into my dress slowly, letting the satin settle against my skin like an old friend. No brand label. No price tag. Just the quiet elegance of something born from my own hands. When we arrived at the estate, the parking area was already dotted with sleek cars and nervous energy. Laughter floated from the gardens. Glasses clinked. The kind of performative joy that never quite reaches the eyes. We walked in, heads high. I felt every eye flick toward us, then linger. And then I heard it, Renee's voice, syrupy and slicing. "Olivia, there you are." "Oh, what a striking dress. Did you design it yourself? I nodded. It shows, she said, pausing just long enough for the sting to land. You always were creative. But this time I didn't flinch. And you always were predictable, I replied with a soft smile, guiding Eliana toward the tables. A few heads turned. A pause in the laughter. Eliana squeezed my hand. I think you just broke the Parker sound barrier, she whispered. We had arrived, not as guests desperate to be liked, but as people finally unafraid of being known. The lawn was pristine, trimmed to within an inch of its life. White tents billowed in the breeze like reluctant sails. Beneath them, small clusters of guests gathered in curated conversations, snippets of hedge funds, vacation homes, new school acceptances. The Parker world spun out in pastels and pearls. We found our seats at a table near the edge, half shaded by a cherry blossom tree. Eliana took her lemonade with 2 slices of strawberry and eyed the nearby dessert tray with strategic precision. I could see her checking the angles, calculating the moment when the adults would be too distracted to notice her second helping. Permission to strategize, Mom? She asked with a grin. Granted. Stealth mode. She slipped away with the grace of a girl who'd danced through worse. I took a breath. The air smelled like cut grass and inherited arrogance. And then he appeared. David Parker, my husband's cousin, heir to one of the more ostentatious branches of the family tree. His blazer was 2 shades too bright, and his teeth too polished to reflect anything honest. Well, if it isn't the famous dressmaker, he said, voice oily with mirth. You're all anyone's talking about today. Oh! I sipped my water. I didn't realize muslin and thread could compete with mergers and acquisitions. He chuckled. Oh no, not that. Your little mentorship program. Renee mentioned it. Such a sweet hobby. There it was again, that word. Hobby. As if anything not monetized, not branded, not approved by some committee of family ambition, was frivolous. I smiled politely. Yes, just teaching girls how to use their voices and feet with power and grace. I'm sure you wouldn't understand. He blinked. Once. Twice. Before he could retort, the band shifted songs from string quartet to something more upbeat. A light jazz number. Unexpected. A disruption. Renee's face twitched slightly across the lawn. And just like that, Eliana returned with a plate of 2 lemon tarts and an extra napkin for me. The perimeter was unguarded, she said. I made my move. I laughed, not just at her cleverness, but at how natural it felt to laugh here, in a place meant to confine us. You know, she added as we ate, you don't have to be loud to change a room. You just have to move differently. From the mouths of 10-year-olds. She was right. This place thrived on predictability, appearances, unquestioned roles. And I dared to rewrite mine. That alone made them uncertain. That jazz song played on, unfurling like a challenge. The music had changed. And now the steps would, too. Halfway through the event, the afternoon heat began to soften. Shadows stretched across the lawn, and the crisp edge of wealth began to wilt into something more human. Conversations slowed. The clinking of forks against porcelain grew sporadic. Even the string quartet returned with something tender, old, familiar, real. And then came the toast. Renee rose, her champagne flute glinting in the light. A hush fell. It was her stage now, and she took to it like a seasoned actress, her voice full of syrup and subtle barbs. We're so honored to have you all here, she began. Especially family who've made time despite busy lives. The busy lives hung in the air like perfume, a dig in disguise. Her gaze flicked to me for just a moment before drifting elsewhere, but the message had already landed. She went on about unity, tradition, legacy, all the usual bullet points of Parker prestige. When she concluded, guests clapped politely, some murmuring compliments more out of obligation than enthusiasm. Then, as if it were spontaneous, one of her daughters, Jade, stood and added, and thank you to Aunt Olivia for inspiring us all with her fashion-forward bravery today. A few guests tittered. Not full laughter. Not cruelty. But that carefully curated Parker-style mockery, social currency wrapped in politeness. I smiled. "Thank you, Jade," I said, my voice steady. "It takes a rare kind of courage to wear what you've made with your own hands. Not everyone has that kind of strength or patience." The table quieted. I didn't look at Renee, but I could feel the heat of her reaction in the way her fingers tightened around her glass. Eliana looked up at me, eyes twinkling. I could feel her pride beaming beside me like a second sun. "Mom," she whispered. "Can I say something?" Before I could answer, she stood. Calm. Straight-backed. 10 years old and radiating a kind of grace that silenced the table before she even spoke. "I just wanted to say thanks to my mom," she began, her voice clear. "She didn't just make my dress. She teaches girls how to believe in themselves, even if they don't have perfect lives. Even if people try to make them feel small. She doesn't do it for applause. She does it because she knows how much it hurts to be ignored." The silence that followed was absolute. Then someone clapped. Softly at first. Then another. Until the whole table was applauding, not for the speech, but for the truth of it. Eliana sat down, cheeks pink but eyes proud. Renee's smile remained frozen, like a crown balanced too precariously to tilt. And in that moment, I realized we hadn't just attended their gathering. We had redefined it. After the toast, the energy around our table changed. Not visibly, these were Parkers, after all. But I felt it. The way conversations turned more attentive. The way small silences stretched longer, pregnant with thoughts people didn't yet know how to name. Eliana, content, picked at the last of her lemon tart while drawing a vine pattern on a cocktail napkin. Around us, relatives who once regarded us with dismissive politeness now offered compliments too carefully phrased to be coincidence. "That speech," murmured Aunt Elaine, her pearl earrings trembling slightly as she leaned in. "Such poise. Such grace. You must be very proud." "I am," I replied, because it was hers. Every word. I meant it. I hadn't coached her. I hadn't even expected her to speak. That moment had been entirely her own, unprompted, unprotected, and unmistakably powerful. When we left the gathering an hour later, walking back to our modest car amidst a sea of luxury sedans, I didn't feel lesser. I didn't feel out of place. I felt like we'd carried something in and out of that space no money could manufacture. Authenticity. Renee didn't say goodbye. But Amber did. She ran up to Eliana just before we reached the gate. "I liked your speech," she said, eyes downcast. "I didn't know. I mean, I didn't realize your mom made all your costumes." Eliana nodded. "She teaches other girls too. We're working on a dress now that looks like moonlight." Amber smiled shyly. "That's cool." It wasn't much, but it was a crack. A possible beginning. Proof that even in the coldest rooms, warmth finds a way in. That night, back home, Eliana asked if we could start sewing again. "Not for a show," she said. "Just for fun." We laid out the fabric she'd chosen, silver gray with a hint of shimmer, like the first frost on bare branches. I pinned the hem while she measured the bodice. Her fingers were more confident now, her eyes focused. "Do you think people change?" she asked suddenly. "I think people reveal who they are when the script slips." "And did it slip today?" I smiled. "No, love. Today, we rewrote it." We worked until nearly midnight. The dress took shape slowly, deliberately, one stitch at a time. And with it, so did the quiet truth. We didn't need anyone's invitation to belong. We brought our own chairs, our own table, our own stories. And that was more than enough. The following week unfolded with a kind of stillness that only comes after a shift has happened. Not the loud kind you see in headlines, but the quiet thunder that rolls through the bones of your daily life. I returned to the mentorship studio and found that word had spread. 3 new girls were waiting outside before I even arrived. One of them, Zara, carried a plastic grocery bag filled with mismatched shoes and a leotard 2 sizes too small. Her mother stood beside her with a look I recognized, worn hope. "She's shy," the mother said. but she doesn't stop moving at home. Zara didn't speak that first day. But when the music started, she moved like she was trying to say everything she couldn't yet trust her mouth to say. After class, I sat on the floor and asked the girls what they wanted from this space. Not to feel dumb, one whispered. To feel pretty, but not like dumb pretty, said another, and they all laughed. To be noticed, Zara said, surprising us all. Her voice was soft, but the words landed heavy. I looked at them, every one a version of a girl I had once been. Eager, afraid, capable of brilliance if someone just gave them space instead of structure. We don't come here to be perfect, I told them. We come here to be possible. They didn't nod like they understood. Not yet. But they kept showing up. That was enough. Meanwhile, Eliana's school invited me in for a meeting. Not for anything disciplinary for once, but because her teacher had nominated her to represent the school in an arts and leadership summit for young girls. Only one student per district. I sat in the tiny office chair, stunned. She's not the loudest, the teacher explained, but the way the other students watch her, they trust her. She models self-respect. I swallowed the sudden lump in my throat. I had spent so many years fearing that my quiet, behind-the-scenes love wasn't enough. But here was proof that love, when consistent, becomes structure, becomes mirror, becomes legacy. When I told Eliana, she didn't jump or squeal. She simply said, "Can I wear the silver dress?" "Yes," I said. "You can wear whatever reminds you who you are." That night, I opened my notebook again. It had been days since I'd written anything. Life had gotten loud, even in its victories. But I found a blank page and I wrote, "Legacy is not the echo of our titles. It's the way our children walk into a room, steady and unafraid, even when no one claps." We danced through sabotage, sewn our truth into cloth, spoke softly and carried ourselves like symphonies. We weren't finished. Not even close. But we were no longer just surviving. We were becoming. 2 weeks before the summit, the studio held its first informal showcase for the mentorship girls. It wasn't a recital, not really. Just a gathering of parents, siblings, and a few curious neighbors who'd noticed the flurry of music and movement through the big glass windows each afternoon. We kept it simple. No stage. No curtains. Just a circle of chairs and an open floor. Each girl chose a piece of music that meant something to her. Eliana helped with the sound cues. I stayed at the back, clipboard in hand, heart swelling with every note, every timid step that grew bolder by the second. Zara danced to a soft instrumental track from a nature documentary. No words, just the slow swell of strings mimicking wind and sky. She wore a dress Eliana and I had helped her make, blue with a hem that flared like waves. When she finished, the room didn't erupt in claps right away. It was too full of breath held tight. When the applause did come, it was tender, real. Afterward, as parents milled about with paper cups of punch and half-hearted cookies, one of the other moms came up to me. "I don't know what you're doing here," she said, "but it's working. My daughter talks about this place like it's sacred." I smiled. It is. Because it wasn't just about dance. It was about giving them a stage they didn't have to earn with perfection, only presence. That night, Eliana and I cleaned up together. Folding chairs. Sweeping glitter. The usual mess of small victories. She was humming softly, something classical reimagined with joy. "You know what I liked best?" she asked. "What?" "That they didn't try to be anyone else. Not even when they messed up." I nodded. That's the bravest thing. We walked home under a pink dusk sky. The trees swayed above like old friends and everything felt aligned. Not perfect. Not easy. But right. And then came the phone call. "Renee." I stared at the screen. For a moment, I thought about letting it ring, but then I answered. "Olivia," she said, voice smoother than usual, but not sharp. "Not tonight. I heard about the mentorship showcase." "You heard?" I asked carefully. "Yes." From Amber. She was really moved. There was silence. I've been thinking, Renee continued. Would you ever consider doing something like that for our school? A workshop? Maybe a series? It took me a moment to realize what she was doing. Extending a hand. A white flag made of chiffon and awkward grace. I'll think about it, I said. And I would. Not for her, but for the girls like Amber, who might need someone to unzip their silence without ripping it apart. After we hung up, I looked at Eliana, already brushing her teeth, her eyes dreamy. She called, I said. I know, she mumbled around a mouthful of foam. I figured she would. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because this was what healing looked like, awkward, slow, sometimes even wearing your rival's perfume. And somewhere in the middle of it all, we were building something durable. Not revenge. Not a perfect life. But a truth that danced even when no one clapped. The next few days moved like honey in warm light, slow but golden. The air hinted at spring's full arrival, and every window in our small home seemed to breathe a little easier. Eliana had begun practicing her speech for the summit. The prompt was simple. What does leadership mean to you? She wrote in silence, her brow furrowed in deep thought, erasing and rewriting the same sentence until it stopped trembling. Do I have to talk about being in charge? She asked one night. No, I said, smoothing a piece of thread between my fingers. You just have to talk about what it means to lead the way you do. Her eyes lit with something quiet but fierce. Okay, then I think I know. While she practiced, I worked on Zara's new dress. She had asked for something like the sky after it rains. We found a bolt of deep slate blue silk at the discount shop, barely enough for a bodice and skirt. But with a bit of silver thread and delicate hand stitching, it began to shimmer like puddles catching stars. Each evening, more mentorship girls started arriving early, just to talk, just to sit. I realized then that what we'd built wasn't just a class. It was sanctuary. And amid it all, Renee's offer hovered. I hadn't replied. I hadn't declined either. I wasn't sure yet if her motives had shifted or if she simply wanted the halo of goodwill. But Amber's face at the showcase had lingered in my memory, the way she clapped like she meant it, the way she looked at Eliana like she saw her for the first time. I decided I'd go see the school. No promises. Just curiosity. It was strange, stepping onto their campus. Everything manicured. Polished. Their idea of perfection, so meticulously curated it felt sterile. I met with their arts coordinator, a pleasant but stiff woman named Clarice, who blinked more than she listened. We're very excited about the idea of a confidence-building workshop, she said, using air quotes as if the phrase were hypothetical. And the girls? I asked. Oh, they'll love it. If it doesn't interfere with college prep, of course. I nodded. But my mind was already picturing a version of the workshop that had nothing to do with GPA. When I got home, Eliana was already asleep, her notebook open beside her, half a sentence scrawled mid-thought. Leadership is like sewing a dress in the dark. You trust the pattern you've made in your mind, and you keep stitching anyway. I closed the notebook gently and kissed her forehead. She was leading already. Not from behind a podium, but from the scene. The day of the summit arrived dressed in nerves. Eliana woke early, not because of alarms, but because her excitement was too big for sleep. She sat at the kitchen table eating cereal in her silver dress, legs swinging, eyes already focused on something beyond. I'm not nervous, she said. I believed her. We arrived at the convention center, a sleek modern space with glass ceilings and polished concrete floors. Girls from every corner of the city filed in, each with a parent or mentor by their side, each wearing something that made them feel strong. Some wore suits. Others wore sneakers with suits. One girl wore a cape. Eliana fit right in. The first part of the day was workshops, storytelling, digital creativity, public speaking. I sat in the parent lounge, sipping too strong coffee from a compostable cup and watching as other adults exchanged business cards and practiced proud detachment. But I wasn't interested in comparing resumes. I was interested in watching a generation of girls speak in full sentences without apology. After lunch, it was time for the speeches. They called each participant one by one. Each girl stood alone on a small stage in front of a semicircle of peers and judges. No podium. No cue cards. Just their voices, their presence. Eliana stepped onto the stage like it was the most natural thing in the world. She wore her silver dress and no shoes. I hadn't noticed that detail before, but I understood it instantly. She wanted to feel the ground. "My name is Eliana," she began, "and I think leadership is not about being the loudest. Sometimes it's about seeing things that are invisible." She talked about her dance group, about girls who didn't think they were worth noticing until they were given a stage that didn't ask them to prove anything first. My mom taught me that real leaders don't just tell people where to go. They remind them that they deserve to be here. I didn't cry, not during the speech. I waited until the applause began. It was thunderous, unprompted, real. Later, when the summit ended and awards were handed out, Eliana didn't win the top prize. That went to a girl who had created an app to fight food insecurity. But she was approached by 4 other girls who asked if she could teach them how to dance. She said yes. That night, back home, she didn't take off the silver dress right away. She walked around in it, barefoot, a small queen in a kingdom made of second chances. "I want to help you at the studio more," she said. "Not just dance. I want to teach." "You already do," I whispered. I watched her twirl once before bedtime, the hem of her dress catching the lamplight like the edge of a moon. And I thought, some girls grow up trying to fit mirrors. Others build rooms without them. And those girls? They change everything. The week after the summit, something began to shift, not in headlines or grand gestures, but in the texture of daily life. At the studio, attendance doubled. Girls brought cousins, neighbors, even a shy girl from the corner bodega who had never taken a class in her life. They came because they heard it was a place where you didn't have to perform perfection. You just had to show up. I rearranged the space to make more room. We pushed back the storage bins and cleared out the racks of old costumes. I bought more mirrors, not for vanity, but so the girls could see themselves clearly, even when they stumbled. Eliana started leading warm-ups on Wednesdays. She called it stretch and sparkle. The girls laughed, but they followed her. Because she didn't lead from in front. She led from beside them. Renee emailed again. "Amber has been asking about your studio. Could she possibly join your Saturday group? She seems different lately. Quieter. Watching more." There was no subtext this time. Just a question wrapped in uncertainty. I told her yes. The following Saturday, Amber arrived with a duffel bag too clean to have ever touched a studio floor. She stood in the corner at first, arms crossed. But Zora handed her a water bottle. Eliana helped her tie her laces. By the end of the session, she was laughing. Not like a Parker. Like a girl. After class, Amber lingered. "Can I come next week too?" she asked. "You can come every week," I said. "As long as you remember the first rule." "What's that?" "We don't compete. We connect." She nodded slowly. "Okay." At home, the silver dress had found a new place, not back in the closet, but on a small mannequin Eliana and I made from an old lampshade and packing paper. It stood in the corner of our living room, a reminder not of a win, but of a moment claimed. That night, while mending the hem of another girl's costume, I found a letter tucked between my fabric samples. It was from Miss Lorraine, the head coach at the studio. It read, "What you're doing matters. It's more than mentorship. It's reclamation. If you ever want to make this official, a nonprofit, a curriculum, anything, I'll back you. These girls need you. We need you." I stared at her handwriting, neat and certain. Then I looked around the room, Eliana sketching at the table, the silver dress watching over us, the soft hum of possibility settling into the air like music. Maybe this wasn't just a chapter. Maybe this was the beginning of a book I was finally ready to write. Not for approval. Not for applause. but because some patterns were always meant to be broken, so we could stitch new ones from truth. I didn't sleep much that night. Miss Lorraine's letter echoed louder in the quiet than anything I'd read in years. A nonprofit. A curriculum. We need you. Need. Such a small word to carry such weight. For most of my life, I'd been needed in ways that drained, caretaking, smoothing conflicts, shrinking myself to let others feel large. But this was different. This was being needed for the very parts of myself I was once told were hobbies. Detours. Dreams without mileage. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn sketching plans on loose sheets of notebook paper, modules for confidence workshops, designs for a mobile studio van, names for the initiative. One phrase kept circling back to me. The silent thread. Not because we were quiet, but because our strength had been unspoken for too long. When Eliana woke up, she shuffled into the kitchen, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. Are we building a kingdom? She asked, peering over the sketches. Yes, I said. One with no throne. Just a lot of chairs. She smiled. And a sewing machine. Later that week, I met with Miss Lorraine in person. She offered the back room of the main studio as a permanent space for the mentorship program. We'll clear the schedule. Build around you. Whatever you need. I had never heard those words strung together like that before. Build around you. We held our first official meeting the following Monday. Eliana stood beside me as I wrote the program name on the whiteboard in pink marker, the silent thread. This is a place for the girls we used to be, I told them, and the women we haven't yet become. Here, no one performs strength. We stitch it. Zara brought 2 new girls. Amber showed up with homemade granola bars and passed them around like peace offerings. One of the newer girls, Lena, who hadn't spoken in 2 weeks, finally whispered, "Can I lead the stretch today?" Eliana nodded. Only if you had sparkle arms. They all laughed. And they stretched. And for a moment, the room felt like church. That night, Eliana and I stitched together a patchwork banner for the new studio wall. Each square was made from a scrap of fabric the girls brought, old pillowcases, dresses that no longer fit, handkerchiefs from grandmothers. We sewed each piece with their names embroidered along the edge, forming a quilt of becoming. And when we hung it above the mirrors, I saw them all staring not at their reflections, but at the fabric. At the proof that they belonged to something. That they were shaping something. That this wasn't just dance. This was voice. This was healing. This was ours. Every thread in that banner held a story. Some were told freely. Others unfolded slowly, like hesitant petals coaxed open by time and gentle light. Lena, the one who had once barely spoken, now came early to sweep the floor and stay late folding scarves with a kind of reverence. Zara brought a playlist one day, soft ballads, beats of her parents' homeland woven with drums and echo. This is what home sounds like when no one's shouting, she said, and I understood without asking more. Amber, now a regular, volunteered to organize a mini showcase. Not for judges. Not even for parents. Just for themselves. Like a celebration, she explained. Of all this. I watched her grow out of the polished shadow she'd been tucked into. No longer mimicking someone else's shine, she was finding her own texture, her own light. We chose a date. We named it The Becoming. It would be small, just the mentorship girls and a few chosen guests. They designed their own dances, their own dresses, every piece of it theirs. Eliana helped me sew sashes. Not the kind you wear across a pageant dress. These were hand-dyed ribbons with each girl's chosen word written in fabric paint. Brave. Honest. Whole. Enough. One girl chose scene. We hung fairy lights in the corners of the studio, the kind that cast shadows like halos. We laid out mismatched cushions in place of rows, breaking down the traditional hierarchy of audience and performer. And that night, under that soft glow, they danced. Not to prove. Not to win. But to mark a moment. Eliana danced last. She wore the silver dress again, her choice, though it had faded a bit from the summit's glow. It still feels like me, she said. Her piece was simple. No leaps, no spins, just fluid motion and fierce eye contact. At the end, she stood still, arms open, not in a bow, but in a gesture of offering. The room didn't clap right away. They cried. And I did too. Because in that room, I saw girls rewrite their stories without needing anyone's permission. Afterward, as we cleaned up glitter and wrung out the last of our energy, Amber hugged me. Not quick, not polite, but deep with both arms, like she meant it. "Thank you for letting us dance without mirrors," she said. "You didn't need them," I replied. "You've been seeing each other all along." I stayed late that night, just me and the banner and the echo of joy. I pressed my fingers to the stitch that bore Eliana's name and whispered a silent prayer, not for success, but for continuation. That this thread would keep weaving through lives, unnoticed perhaps, but unbreakable. Because sometimes, the strongest legacies aren't inherited. They're hand-stitched in rooms no one thought mattered.